language, what language would naturally develop? Now, obviously, he thought it was going to be German. So he thought, well, if these babies don't hear a language, don't experience a language, obviously they're going to grow up speaking German. So what he did to conduct this experiment is he took 100 babies from their mothers at birth, okay? And he took them and he put them in their own individual little beds or compartments. And he gave the nurses strict instructions. He said, I want you to still look after the baby's basic needs, their physical needs. So they still need food, they still need to be clean and kept hygienic, so they still need their diapers and their nappies changed, they need to be fed. But to do this, you're not allowed to touch the babies. So they had to do the nappy changing and the feeding with other equipment. He also said, I don't want these babies to be exposed to any language. So if you need to talk, you need to do it away from the babies. Do not talk to the babies, do not touch the babies. So, as you can imagine, as these babies grew up, all their basic physical needs were being met, but they were not being touched and they were not being spoken to. So what language do you think they developed? No language, okay? So these babies, when they grew up, they actually could not speak. And the reason that they could not speak is because all 100 of these babies actually died. So this experiment actually proved that without human interaction, without touch, and without love, the body's natural response is to actually shut down. Now, this experiment has been researched extensively because a lot of people think he was crazy. Like, this was such a crazy experiment, why would you do that? And one person said this was what he concluded. He said, we humans flourish under the influence of love and we gradually die without it. Now, I love this because in your classroom, do you want your students to purely survive, or do you want them to flourish? What do you want? Yeah, to flourish. And then Dr. Dean Ornish, he wrote a book called Love and Survival, and he looked at this experiment a lot. And he said modern science is now proving through controlled studies that human beings are literally engineered for love. He said we are made for love, as if our DNA contains the message, you must love and be loved in order to survive. Now, this does not, the results are shocking. The fact that 100 babies had to die to find this out is really devastating. But in a lot of ways, this does not surprise me because the first book of the Bible, Genesis, talks about how the earth was formed. It talks about creation. And day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6, God creates the earth. Now, for most of the things, how does God create the earth? What does he do? He just speaks, okay? He uses the power of his voice and the earth forms into creation. But when he creates human beings, what does he do? He comes down to the earth and he forms them. And he breathes his own breath into them. So the fact that they are saying this, these scientists are saying, oh, it looks like we need love, it's ingrained in our DNA. It's no surprise because the creator of the universe who created us, the first thing that he created us with was his own touch. It has been in us since the beginning that we need love and we need touch in order to survive and to flourish. So why Jesus the great teacher? Well, I believe if we want our students to flourish, not just survive, but we need to be the greatest teachers possible. And who better to look at than the greatest example of teaching that ever existed? And if we want to be the best at showing love, then we need to look at the best example of love that we have ever seen in history. Now, this world is not getting easier. If I compare the troubles that I had as a teenager to the troubles that teenagers are now is pretty scary. Okay, so these are some of the current problems, at least in Australia. I may be wrong with the problems that you have here in Peru, but at least the context I'm coming from, these are the struggles that our young people are experiencing. Okay, so a significant increase in mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and suicide. Is this the case in Peru also? Yeah, okay. An increase in the use of drugs, alcohol, and other substances from an early age. Yes, okay. Sexual stimulation and addiction due to easier accessibility of pornographic materials. It's a problem here too. I was actually shocked to find out, I think it was only about a year ago, but a lot of my students in the past, like 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, they all have the application Instagram. Who has heard of Instagram? You've heard of Instagram? Yes? Okay. It actually shocked me to find out, though, that the amount of pornographic material that's available on Instagram is almost equal to that on pornographic websites. And the thing that makes it more shocking is that children who are only 7 years old, 10 years old, all they need to do is actually just search and it just appears. There's no need to verify their age. There's no need to show identification for them to access these materials. An increase in bullying and peer pressure, physical, verbal and emotional. Is that a problem here in Peru also? And cyberbullying, actually, that's a big one. Social pressures and low self-esteem, particularly due to social media platforms, so the art of comparison, feeling like their self-worth comes out of how many people like their post. Exposure to violent behaviours through gaming platforms. Who has heard of Fortnite? All the teachers in here have heard of Fortnite? Yes. In Australia, I think worldwide, this has become a big issue, and it also connects to the significant increase in mental health issues because at least I've heard of cases in Australia and America where children as young as 7 and 8 years old are taking their own lives, are committing suicide based on their success in these video games, which is really scary. And then an increase in witnessing parental issues such as domestic violence and an increase in divorce. So for me, I think the need to show love and to help students to flourish, the responsibility on teachers is becoming greater. Now, that's both a scary thing and a good thing. I want you to do something for a moment. Now, this is something I've started doing each year just to keep myself accountable, okay, to what does ministry in the classroom mean and why is it important? So I like to create for myself a statistic, my statistic. And this is what my statistic looks like. So in 2015, I taught a class of 27 students. In 2016, a class of 28. 2017, I had 31 students. Last year, I had 23 students. And then this year, it's a little bit different because I'm going by cycle. I'm not in a primary classroom, so I change my students every 2 or 3 months. So January to February in the summer cycle, I had 23 students. March to June, I had 61 students in 3 different classes. And right now in July, I have 19 students. So for me, over my 4.5 years of teaching, 27 plus 28 plus 31 plus 23 plus 23 plus 61 plus 19, that's 189 students that I have come in contact with over my 5-year career. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I just want you to quickly think. I know that it may be difficult, especially if you've been teaching for like 10 or 15 years to remember. But I want you to calculate a rough statistic for yourself, okay? I would just give you 2 minutes. Go. Write it in your cell phone or on some paper. Just think, how many students have you come in contact with in your career? Go. A lot. Yeah, wow. Yeah, true. Yeah. That's a lot. That's crazy. Do, do you think you can remember all their names? Some of them. So I think we have a winner down the front here. We're just talking about our statistics. So Dr. Christian said probably around 1,000 for him. How many years have you been teaching? 22 years, okay, around 1,000 students. And Sylvina, how many did you say? 3,600? Okay, around 3,600. That's crazy. I thought 186, what's my statistic? I thought 189 was a lot. Like when I saw that, I was like, whoa, what a big number. But that's impressive. But the reason I love to do this is because, for me, it keeps me accountable that's 189 opportunities to share Jesus that had walked right into my life without me having to go out looking for them or making any effort. That's 189 opportunities that I have had to share Jesus with people who have actually paid to have me instruct them. Now, they may have paid for an English course, or they may have signed up to primary school, but at the end of the day, because you're a teacher, people automatically look to you for more than just the academic teaching. They look at you as a person in society who is respectful and someone who can also guide them in life. Now, I would love to say that I've baptized all 189 of these students, okay? But the reality is we also have a force, we have an enemy that is working against us to try and put separation between us in our ministry and these young people. I heard it once said by a pastor that the only difference between a pastor and a teacher is the building that they work in. And I love that because for myself as well, I'm talking to myself here. Imagine if every single Christian teacher treated their classroom like it was a church. Imagine if they considered that the only difference was the building that we work in. If we looked at our role as more of a pastoral role, the academic stuff is important, don't get me wrong. But imagine if we viewed our role more like this. So I have these five steps that I want to share with you today on how we can share more love in our classroom, how we can help our students to flourish under the influence of Jesus, and how, as teachers ourselves, we can improve our own character to be more like Jesus and to be not a better representation, because I have no doubt that you're all fantastic Christians, but how we can grow ourselves in order to be the best version of these teachers that we want to be. So my 5 steps are that we need to spend time in the Word, we need to pray for and with our students, we need to share our testimonies, we need to prioritize teaching of the gospel over teaching a curriculum, and we need to give God all the glory for classroom success. So number 1, spend time in the Word. Now, teaching is very busy. Is that correct? Do you find yourself always wishing you had more time? Yes? Can I get an amen for that? Yes, okay. I think that was one of the biggest surprises for me when I started teaching. Because when I signed up for teaching, it was because I was like, oh wow, a job where you only have to work from 9 till 5 and you get 12 weeks of holidays? This job must be easy, no problem. And then I entered into full-time teaching and it was the opposite. You feel like from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, to your weekends and your holidays, what do you always have on your mind? Whether it's curriculum, whether it's a student, whether it's a parent of a student, there's always something going on in there. So, to elaborate on this a little bit, I just want you to do a small activity for me. I want you to think of your favourite teacher that you ever had, whether it was in primary school, secondary school, or in your English classes. Think of your favourite teacher that you've ever had. And then I want you to list the 3 reasons or 3 qualities that made them your favourite teacher. So for me in primary school, her name was Mrs. Osmond. And she was this very small lady with red curly hair. And I just remember her, she was only I think I was only 5 or 6, but I still remember her. Because she was always smiling, she never raised her voice, and she always had time to answer questions. Like, no question was a stupid question. And then in secondary school, a teacher called Mrs. Nelson, she also had red hair, but it was shorter. She made learning creative. She spent time with us outside of classroom teaching. So when it was her lunch break, she would come and sit with us, and she would eat her lunch with us and talk to us. And then she always shared personal stories about her life. So I want you to take 2 minutes again and write down the name of your favourite teacher ever. And write 3 reasons why they have stayed in your mind up until this day. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, why have they still made an impact on your mind? Okay, so just for 2 minutes, the name of your favourite teacher and 3 qualities that made them your favourite. In your cell phone, on some paper, whatever you have available, okay? Once you've done that, I actually want you to tell the person next to you about your favourite teacher also. Okay, so tell the people around you who your favourite teacher was and why they were your favourite teacher. Just 1 more minute. Okay. Are there any people who are willing to share who their favourite teacher was? Anyone who would like to share with the group? Yes, thank you. So your favourite teacher and why?
Well, my favorite teacher was Miss Silvia Cueva, and she was my English teacher, and I was motivated every class that she entered because she always sings and prays, and I love the way she do the worship in our classes. She was my high school teacher, and well, she inspired me to become an English teacher.
That's awesome. Yes, thank you for sharing. And yes, a round of applause. Why not? And I love that your clear memories of your teacher are about the praise and the worship that they had. I think that's so awesome. Is there one more person who would like to share? Maybe on this side of the world? Yes, one more. Thank you.
Good morning. My best teacher was Mrs. Roxana. She's from the university. She taught me in the university. She's patient, and also she always understands your feelings. When you talk with she listens to you, and I love that, and that's the reason that I love her.
Let's give our friend a round of applause. Thank you. Sounds like a great teacher. Okay, now, on the opposite end, I want you to think of your least favourite teacher. Okay, now I have called mine Mrs. Anonymous because I don't think I need to share her name. At the end of the day, God loves her, okay? I found her difficult, but she is a child of God, so I do not need to say her name. And to be honest, now that I'm an adult, I understand that maybe she was having a difficult year. Maybe this was not who she was, but for me, this particular year in her classroom in primary school was really difficult for me. The reason being, she never affirmed progress. So you could be so excited about something you achieved, and she wasn't really excited for you. It was just, yeah, whatever. Cool, good job. She yelled a lot. So her voice was always really loud and really uncomfortable. And because she would publicly point out mistakes. So if you made a mistake, you were made to feel embarrassed or ashamed. And so it's like you were too nervous to continue your learning because you were worried that you would be publicly pointed out for your mistakes. So I would like you as well to think of your least favourite teacher. Hopefully they're not in this room. They're not here, son. Okay, think of your least favourite teacher and think of the 3 reasons why, not their personal character, but the 3 reasons why you found learning difficult in their classroom. Okay, so I'll just give you 2 more minutes to do that. Think of your least favourite teacher and 3 reasons why learning was difficult for you in their classroom. Go. Okay, and we will continue. Now, I won't ask you to publicly share because I don't think we need to publicly I don't think we publicly need to put people down, but I just want you to put this in the back of your mind, okay? So I have these 3 teachers in my life who have greatly impacted me. 2 for the positive, 1 for the negative. Now, when I look at these qualities, and then I line these qualities up with myself, Mrs. Charlson, the question is, which qualities of the positive teacher do I possess? And which qualities of the negative teacher do I possess? If I'm being honest, okay? So for example, always smiling. Some days I smile a lot. Some days I don't think I smile at all in the classroom. It depends on the day. If I'm being honest, okay, I'm not a perfect teacher. Never raised her voice. I must admit, there have been times where that one student has kept pushing, until Mrs. Charlson explodes because they think it's entertaining, I guess. I don't know. My husband also likes to do the same. Okay? Always had time to answer questions. I wish I could say that I was this teacher also, but in the middle of a maths class, I just don't have time to answer the question, where do babies come from? I'm sorry, but it's just not the most important thing for me in that moment. Made learning creative. This one I think I do a pretty good job of most days. Spent time with us outside of the classroom. So spending time with students outside of the classroom. Another one that I don't always do very well. Because you know what it's like with your lunch break. You need to run to make more photocopies, or you need to plan for the next lesson. There's always something. Shared personal stories. This one I do like to do. Never affirmed progress. I put yes and no, because some days, again, I feel like I do it a lot, and then other days the whole day goes by and you're just like, oh, who did I affirm today? Yelled a lot, depends on the day, and publicly pointed out mistakes. I try not to do this one. This one, I am very cautious that I do not want to be that kind of teacher. But when I look at this list, I look at that and I think, I need Jesus. I need Jesus. And we're really lucky because when we spend time in the Word, when we spend our personal time with God, before we go to school, before we go to work, when we spend time in the presence of God, the Spirit of God becomes more present in us. And that teacher that we want to be like, that positive teacher that we remember, the one who was full of patience, the one who was full of kindness, automatically by spending time with our Creator, we start to inherit those characteristics. And the Bible also tells us about the fruits of the Spirit. Who has said before, oh, I wish I was a more patient teacher. I wish I was a more loving teacher. I wish I was a more gentle teacher. We can be. We have the power and we have the source to be more patient, to be more loving, to be more kind, to be more gentle. But the priority is, the thing that we need to do is we need to actually spend time with the one who created these characteristics. So my first point is that before you spend time in your classroom with your students, with your colleagues, make sure you spend time with the one who called you to be a teacher in the first place. Because without him, what is the point? So even if it is the busiest week of your life, which is every week in teaching life, I encourage you, just put the exams aside, put the marking and the grading aside, just for 30 minutes a day, and open your Bible and spend time with God. And I can assure you that the effects that will have will outweigh the effects of falling a little bit behind in that work that you've put aside. My second point is to pray for and with your students. Now, when I say this, it's really important that we do pray for our students, okay? But if you're like me, and maybe you're not, maybe it's just me, but I'm very guilty of being the person who says, I'll pray for you, and then I walk away and I forget. Is that just me? Okay, good. I'm in the presence of other honest people. Thank you. I feel much better. But it is really important that we do actually follow through. So if you have a student who is struggling academically, and this is any level, children, adults, teenagers, everyone has struggles, okay? Academically, personally, emotionally, we all have struggles. But if a student says to you, Miss, I have this going on at home, it's why I've been late, okay? Tell that student, I'll pray for you, and then just take 30 seconds to actually say a prayer. Okay, we need to actually follow through with this because the power of prayer over our students is massive. It is so important. I also love to pray on the spot with students, and I almost think if the students are comfortable, I think this is the better option. Because if a student comes to you and they say, Miss, I'm so sorry I've been late, it's because I've had these personal problems, just say to them, hey, can I take a moment to pray with you? And just for 1 minute, just put your hand on their shoulder and commit them to God. Say, hey God, I have this student. You know their struggles. I pray that you be with them, Father. In your name, amen. Okay? It doesn't need to be a thesis prayer. It doesn't need to go on for hours and hours. That student just needs to see that you care about their problems and that you are committing their problems to the one who is in control. Now, something else I love to do, and this is fantastic in the context of teaching English as a second language, it provides another opportunity to practice English. So I like to ask for prayer requests at the beginning of class. So before we do our prayer together as a class, just ask the class, are there any prayer requests? Now, if they're confident and happy to share, they will tell you, okay? Miss, my grandfather is in the hospital, my family car is not working and we really need it to get to work. And then you can say a prayer over all of these requests for the class. And I think that's awesome. One example that I've had the blessing of experiencing with this, is in the summer cycle here at UPeU. I asked the students, are there any prayer requests? And one student put up her hand and she said, yes, I have a cousin. He has come down with an illness and he's actually gone blind. And so we committed that to prayer, that class. And then a few weeks went by, and then again in a different class I said, are there any prayer requests? And this same student, she put up her hand and she said, I have a prayer of thanks. And I said, yeah, fantastic. What's your prayer of thanks? And she said, well, my cousin who we prayed for 2 or 3 weeks ago, he actually has vision again in one of his eyes. And so that was a really awesome moment because it not only, brought this closeness upon the classroom, but for those students in that class who were not Christian, it showed them the living power of God. They had an immediate experience with an answer to prayer. So I think asking for prayer requests is really important. If the students are not comfortable to say their prayer requests, have a prayer request box. So it just needs to be an old tissue box or something with a hole in the top, and then at any time in the class students can come, they can write a prayer request and put it in the box. And I always tell my students, your request can be anonymous or you can put your name. It does not matter. And then at the end of the class or at the end of the week, you can take those prayers out, you can read them, and then you can commit them to God also. They're practicing writing their English in an environment that has no pressure, but they're also committing it to God. The same with a prayer journal. It took me 3 years of teaching to actually put this idea into action. I thought of it many times and I thought, I don't think the students will like it. When it comes to prayer, just try. You have nothing to lose, okay? Just do it. If you feel like God has given you this idea, just do it. But I gave all of my 10-year-old students just a little notebook. And 3 times a week, they had 15 minutes just to write their prayers. Thank you, God, for God, I am worried about, and God, please help me with. And they completed the 3 sentences. Then the students had 2 options. There was a pile on my desk. If you're happy for the teacher to read your prayer, you can put your book here. If you do not want the teacher to read your prayer, and you want it only to be for God, you put your book here. And the students who hated writing, it became one of their favourite times of the week because there was no pressure. And it's almost like they were relieving some pressure by writing down their worries. So a student who didn't like writing would be praying for things like, God, I hate writing, please help me with my writing, even though he was writing. So it kind of had this double benefit, I guess, because the students were learning to pray, they were committing their worries to God, but they were also practicing their writing. And then the last point I have here is learn about their lives and meet their physical and spiritual needs. Something that Jesus always did to help people's spiritual needs was to meet their physical needs. So something I love to do for this is this. When I'm taking the attendance, I like to ask a question. And the students think that the questions are just for fun or innocent. But these questions can actually give you a lot of information about a student's life. So, for example, what did you have for breakfast this morning? What did you have for dinner last night? If you could be any superhero, who would you be? Tell me in one sentence what you did on the weekend, etc. Okay? I want you to take a moment, these questions in yellow, just ask your friends. Okay? So ask your friends these questions in yellow, just for 2 minutes. Yeah, now. Now. Okay, see, don't you feel like you know each other a little bit more now? Don't you feel like your friendships are closer? See, the reason I love this strategy is because it gives you information. The students are having fun and they're being creative, but it's actually giving you information about what is truly happening in their lives. So these are some real answers that I have experienced in my primary classroom. So for example, what did you have for breakfast this morning? A chocolate bar and Coca-Cola. So I automatically know that that child has come into my classroom stimulated on sugar. So if they're acting crazy or if they can't concentrate, automatically I have my reason why. What did you have for dinner last night? Nothing. Now this one, it actually turned out this student had not eaten in about 2 days. And we had to get to the bottom of some quite serious issues that were happening in his home. But because we were able to provide for his physical needs, I feel like it just opened him up a little bit more to knowing who Jesus was, because we sat with him, we prayed with him, we gave him food, we provided for his physical needs in order to help assist his spiritual needs as well. Tell me in one sentence what you did on the weekend. I played video games and watched a movie. And when I say movie, I mean 7-year-olds who are watching movies filled with violence and nudity. And so these students, when they start to act a bit aggressive or violent, automatically I know what needs I need to meet for that child and what I can pray for. If you could create any invention, what would it be? A machine that would make my dad stop being sick. Okay? So automatically, I'm being given information that tells me how I can help my students. How can I meet their physical needs? How can I physically assist them in order to help their spiritual needs? And it also helps me to know what I can be praying for those students. Okay, number 3, share your testimonies. Now, many people find it difficult to believe in God because they say, how can I believe in something with no physical evidence? How can I believe in something that I cannot see or touch? But when you share your testimony, you are the physical evidence. You are the thing that people can see and people can touch that will connect them to God. So when you share your testimony, it actually makes the power of the living God real. And the example that I personally have with this, that I have experienced it, is a story of my grandfather. So my grandparents, my mum's side of the family, are from Poland, which is Polonia? Yes, Polonia? Okay. And they lived in Poland for many years. Now, that made it a little bit difficult to communicate sometimes because English is their second language and they did not have formal training. They moved to Australia for a better life and they started to pick up the language as they were immersed in it. Now, my grandfather, at the time of World War II, he was a young man, he was just married. He'd only been married to my grandmother for a short amount of time. And this was a time where they were calling all the young men to be enlisted to fight as soldiers in the war. Now, for my grandfather, this was conflicting because he thought, well, I'm a Christian, I believe in love and peace, I don't believe in killing and violence. And so he thought, what am I going to do? I don't know. So he thought on it for weeks and weeks leading up to his physical exam. So before being recruited as soldiers, they needed to have a physical exam to see if they were healthy enough to be a soldier and fight in the war. Now the day of the physical exam came, and my grandfather was still thinking, this is not in line with what I believe. I will not go and fight in a war when I serve a God who has taught me about love and about peace. So what my grandfather did is before his physical exam, he went and he took 3 cups of black coffee. So 1, 2, 3. Then he stepped up to the mark with the doctor to have his physical exam. And they measured him, they weighed him, they checked him, they said, yeah, pretty good, looking good. And then they listened to his heart. And his heart was going really fast. And they said to him, oh, do you have a heart problem? He said, no, not that I know of. And they said, well, your heart is beating really fast. We think you have a heart problem. They said, you need to go see a doctor. We can't actually have you as a soldier in the war. And so my grandfather, who had had 3 cups of coffee, knowing what he was doing, he did not go see a doctor. He went home, he waited for the coffee to wear off, to subside. He went home to his wife, and then 2 or 3 years later, he moved to Australia for a better life. Now, I remember as a child, when I heard this story, my whole opinion of my grandfather changed. Now, I did not have a bad opinion of him before, but I just remember thinking, I was like, wow, his faith is so inspiring. Like the fact that he did not want to go and fight in a war that contradicted what he believed. And even now as a 29-year-old adult, that story still stays in my mind. So the power of your testimony, whether you tell it to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, 10, 20 or 30 years later, they will still be thinking about it. It will impact them. So just a few tips. I think I'm short on time, so I'll quickly skip through these. A few tips to share your testimony. Keep it age appropriate. Okay? If you're telling 5-year-olds, you need to use different language to if you're telling 25-year-olds. Okay? Use easy to understand language. As Adventists, it's very easy for us to say things like, I love how Ellen White talks about Revelation and Daniel and Pathfinders and the Sabbath. Okay? And for new people, it's like we're speaking Chinese. Okay? They don't understand. So make sure you use language that is simple and easy to understand. And your testimony isn't just confined to one moment in your life. Your testimony is your life. So it's not just the one moment you came to know God, it's how God is working in your life every day. If God answered a prayer yesterday, share it with your students. If you prayed for a student and you have seen God answer that prayer, tell that student, okay? It's not just one moment, it is your everyday life with God. Okay, number 4, prioritize teaching of the gospel over teaching of the curriculum. So this one, I just have another quick I have 2 more stories and then I'll finish. Sorry. I know that you're probably hungry for lunch. I know how good Peruvian food is, so I don't blame you. So at my school last year, I remember we had 10 minutes for worship every morning, which I think 10 minutes is not really enough, but I'll take the 10 minutes, okay? And this one morning in particular, one student put up their hand and asked a question about heaven. And this conversation about heaven with 27-year-olds continued for 1.5 hours. And I looked at the time and I was like, oh no, I'm already behind on my geography unit. And now I've spent an hour of the geography time talking about heaven. And I was so stressed that whole day because I was like, well, I need to fit in the geography unit. I need to finish this geography. Like, we spent a whole hour speaking about heaven and we were meant to be doing geography. And I was so stressed. Can anyone relate to that? When you fall behind in your work and you know that it's going to take you double the time to make it up? But what I learned from that experience is God makes up the difference. Because a few weeks later, I had one student and he kept saying to me, oh, I only asked questions because I didn't want to do my work. I only asked questions because I didn't want to do geography. I think geography is boring. And I said, yeah, okay, no problem. All good. I can handle it. That's fine. But then the next day, and this boy considered himself an evolutionist. At 7 years old, he loved Darwin's theory, okay? His dad was an atheist, and he just loved the idea of evolution. But the next day, so a couple of weeks after, his mum came to me and she said, you know what? At dinner last night, I heard all about heaven. And I said, really? And she said, yes, I got a full breakdown on what happens to people when they die, and then what heaven will look like, and how we can get to heaven. And it was in that moment that for me, I was like, God, you are making up the difference for what I thought was gone, for what I thought was a mistake. Because not only did that student, it planted a seed for him, but he went home and he told his family, which planted a seed for them. And so that geography unit, I don't think we did ever finish it. But at the end of the day, it's actually okay, because God will make up the difference for the information those children missed out on. Okay, and last but not least, give God all the glory for your classroom success. This one is really important. When a student achieves well, it's easy for teachers to look at themselves and say, oh, that was because of me. And God has given you those gifts, so I do not discredit that. But at the end of the day, none of it would be possible without the gifts that God has given us. And my last story, the example I have of this, is I had a student who was in the 5th grade. He was 10 years old. And for 3 years, he had been doing the math of a 6-year-old. So he was really behind in his mathematics. And he did have a learning disability, so he found learning very, very difficult. But maths especially, for 3 years, he had been repeating the same content. For 3 years doing 2nd grade maths. And it got to the middle of his year with me, and I just remember sitting there and I was like, God, I don't know what to do for him anymore. I have done every creative, hands-on lesson ever invented. I have repeated the same content with him to try and help him to see if repetition helps. And I just became overwhelmed with worry, because I thought to myself, well, what kind of a chance at life will he have? If he can't do these basic math skills, are people going to give him a job? Will people in the world be kind to him? And I just had this moment where my heart was breaking and I was like, God, what can I do for this student? Because I feel like I have done everything and I'm so tired and I feel like I can't do any more for him. And then I had this epiphany. I was like, why don't you pray for him? And I was like, why has it taken me 2 terms to think of that? But I started to pray for this student. Not every day, but every 2nd or 3rd day, just for about a term. And all glory to God, within 1 term, he went up a whole maths level. Something that we had been fighting to do for 3 years happened in 1 term once I invited God into the situation. And that's not because of me, because I had tried every single thing I could think of. It was only when I invited God into the situation that I actually saw it change. So I would like to say thank you for your time. I really, really hope that you can take some of these ideas and take them to your classroom. Because at the end of the day, the reason that we do this is for God. The academic success, it's really important. But more importantly is, are we spending every day, for me, have I embraced 189 opportunities to share Jesus with my students? So God bless you all as you continue this difficult ministry. I believe that you are doing an amazing job at sharing Jesus with your classes.
We are very low on